It's December 2020. The world is in the middle of a pandemic. Most tech offices are empty. And inside one of the most important AI research labs on Earth, something is quietly falling apart. A researcher named Dario Amodei, one of the most senior people at OpenAI, hands in his resignation. He doesn't say much publicly. He doesn't announce anything. He just leaves. Over the next few months, more than a dozen of his colleagues would follow. What they went off to build would eventually be funded by one of the biggest fraudsters in financial history. The company whose CEO was approached to take over OpenAI at its most chaotic moment and said no. Get designated a national security risk by the US Department of Defense and became one of the most valuable private companies on Earth. This is the story of Anthropic. To understand Anthropic, you have to understand Dario Amodei. He studied physics at Stanford, then went to Princeton for a PhD in biophysics. Not computer science, biophysics. That background matters because Dario has always thought about AI the way a scientist thinks about a system. After his PhD, he went on to work at Baidu's Silicon Valley AI lab, then Google. Then in 2016, he joined a small nonprofit AI research lab that was just getting off the ground. You may have heard of it. It's OpenAI. At OpenAI, Dario rose quickly. He became vice president of research, essentially the person overseeing what the lab was actually building. And what they were building in those years was something that nobody has really seen before. In 2019, OpenAI released GPT-2, a language model so capable, or so they believed, that they refused to release the full version at first, worried about misuse. Dario was a part of that decision. Then in 2020, GPT-3, at the time the largest and most capable language model ever trained, and Dario's team built it. His sister, Daniela, was also there. She joined OpenAI as Vice President of Safety and Policy, a title that would prove significant for reasons that were just beginning to take shape. OpenAI had a problem that most startups would kill for. They were doing genuinely groundbreaking research, and it was expensive. Training these models required enormous amounts of computing power, and computing power costs real money. So OpenAI did something that would change its trajectory permanently. They took $1 billion from Microsoft. On paper, it was just a funding deal. In practice, it was the beginning of a shift in how the company operated and what it was optimizing for. Now, the exact details of what happened internally at OpenAI are not fully public. We don't have a complete picture. But what's been reported and what several of the people who've left have said tells a reasonably clear story. There was a group inside OpenAI that had grown increasingly worried about the direction things were heading. The concern wasn't simply that OpenAI was taking money, it was what that money seemed to require in return. Closer integration with Microsoft products, a pressure towards commercialization, a prioritization of capability over caution. Dario later described it plainly. He said there was a group of them who believed deeply in two things: that AI was going to become more powerful than almost anyone was planning for, and that the safety research needed to keep up with the capability research. Right now, not later. That wasn't what was happening. There was a broader fear, one that Jack Clark, OpenAI's former policy director, later articulated directly: the fear of what they called industrial capture. The idea that a company building something as powerful as AGI could gradually get so intertwined with commercial interests that the original mission, safe AI for everyone's benefit, becomes secondary to shareholder value. Whether OpenAI actually lost its way, or whether this was simply a difference of judgment between smart people, that's still contested. OpenAI would tell you a different story, but the people who left to believe something had gone wrong, and they left to try to do it differently. Dario Amodei left OpenAI in December 2020. Over the following weeks and months, more people followed. His sister Daniela, others. In total, around 11 people from OpenAI left together to start something new. What's striking about this group isn't just that they were senior, it's who they were. Jared Kaplan is a theoretical physicist who, while OpenAI, co-authored what became known as the Scaling Laws paper. That paper made a specific, testable claim that if you made AI models bigger, trained them on more data, and gave them more compute, they would get more capable and predictable ways. That sounds obvious now, but at the time, it was one of the most important empirical findings in the field. It gave the entire industry a map. Chris Olah is a different kind of researcher. He never finished his undergraduate degree, but he became one of the most cited figures in AI for years. His work is trying to actually open up a neural network and understand what's happening inside of it. Not just what the model outputs, but what it actually is doing internally and why. Most AI research treats the model as a black box. Olah has spent his entire career trying to make it a glass one. Then there's Tom Brown, who was the lead author in the GPT-3 paper. He didn't just contribute to it, his name is first on the research that arguably kicked off the modern AI era. These weren't people chasing a trend, they were people who had built the thing that everyone else was chasing, and now they wanted to build it again, differently. Anthropic was incorporated in early 2021. The name comes from Greek. It means roughly related to humans. Whether that's a reference to the anthropic principle in cosmology or is simply a statement of purpose, it's unclear. What they were very deliberate about was the company's legal structure. Anthropic was set up as a public benefit corporation. They wanted to build in, legally, the ability to say no to shareholders when the mission required it. The stated mission, the responsible development and maintenance of advanced AI for the long-term benefit of humanity. It's easy to roll your eyes at a sentence like that. Every tech company says something similar. But the people's founding Anthropic had spent years watching what happened when that kind of language got subordinated to quarterly targets. They were trying to build a structure that made it harder to repeat. In May 2021, they raised their first round of funding, $124 million. The lead investor was John Tallon, the co-founder of Skype and a prominent figure in the AI safety community. The early team got to work. They were not trying to just build a consumer product. They were trying to do research, foundational research into what makes AI systems safe, interpretable, and controllable, building a project that would come later, and only if the research supported it. In April 2022, Anthropic announced a much larger funding round, $580 million. The lead investor was Sam Bankman-Fried. There is FTX Foundation and related entities. At the time, SBF was the golden child of the crypto world, projecting billions in profits and a reputation as a committed philanthropist. 6 months later, FTX collapsed in one of the biggest financial frauds in history. Bankman-Fried was arrested, tried, and convicted. Anthropic had to work through the fallout. FTX's bankruptcy estate held a large block of Anthropic shares that eventually sold to a consortium of buyers. Anthropic itself was not implicated in any wrongdoing, but it remains an awkward chapter in their history. A company built on the mission of responsible, long-term thinking with nearly $600 million from a man who turned out to be running a fraud. The irony is not lost. In the summer of 2022, Anthropic finished training the first version of their model. They called it Claude, and they didn't release it. Their public reasoning was twofold. They needed more safety testing, and they didn't want to kick off a race dynamic in the AI industry by dropping a new model into the world without being confident in it. What they were doing inside during this period was developing something they called the constitutional AI. Here's how it works. Most AI models at the time were trained using a method called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. If humans rate the model responses, and you train the model to do more of what gets good ratings, it works, but it's opaque. You're essentially asking the model to satisfy a crowd average, and you can't always audit why it learned what it learned. Constitutional AI works differently. Instead of relying primarily on human raters to define good behavior, you give the model a set of written principles, a constitution. The model then evaluates its own outputs against those principles, revising them before any human ever sees them. It's self-critique baked into the training process. Underneath all of this is a deeper problem that Anthropic, more than most labs, talks about openly. We don't actually know what's happening inside these models. You can watch what goes in and what comes out, but the billions of parameters in between, the actual computation, it's largely opaque. It's not that the math is hidden, it's that the math is so complex, so fast, that even the people who built the model can't reliably explain why it said what it said. This is why Chris Olah has spent his entire career on, and it's what Anthropic has invested in more than any other lab. Think of it this way. If you're flying a plane, you want to understand not just whether it flew, but why it flew. Because if something goes wrong, you need to know where to look. Right now, with most large AI models, we're flying planes that we don't fully understand. We know they mostly work, but we don't always know why. Anthropic's bet is that before these systems get any more powerful, someone needs to do the hard work to actually understanding them. That's what their research is trying to build toward. This was the core technical bet Anthropic was making, that safety wasn't something you bolt on at the end. You had to be a part of the architecture from day one. November 30th, 2022, OpenAI releases ChatGPT. Within 5 days, it has 1 million users. Within 2 months, 100 million. It becomes the fastest growing consumer application in history. The world suddenly cares, loudly and publicly, about AI in a world that it never had before. Anthropic is sitting on a finished model that they haven't released. They're 18 months into building the company on safety-first thesis, in near total obscurity. And the company they left to do it differently has just lit the world on fire. The pressure to ship something is immediate. Then, in March 2023, Anthropic released Claude. Not to the general public, though. To improved users, businesses, developers, and researchers. They were not trying to win the consumer race. They were trying to sell access to a model they believed that was meaningfully safer and more reliable for professional use. Claude was immediately noted for something specific. It was harder to manipulate into producing harmful outputs. For enterprise customers, legal, finance, healthcare, it turned out to be a significant selling point. The AI community's reaction was more mixed. Claude was seen as capable, but conservative. Some developers found the refusals frustrating. It would sometimes decline things that GPT would handle without hesitation. Others found that consistency to be exactly the point. You knew what you were getting. In September 2023, Amazon announced an initial investment of $1.25 billion into Anthropic, with a commitment to potentially invest up to $4 billion total. 1 month later, Google, which had already taken a minority stake the previous year for around $300 million, put in another $500 million, with a pledge for more. What was happening here was something bigger than Anthropic raising money. Amazon and Google were effectively placing their bets on which AI lab would matter long term. They couldn't afford to back only the obvious frontrunner. They needed relationships with the serious contenders, and Anthropic was clearly one of them. In 2024, something notable started happening. People from OpenAI began moving to Anthropic. Jan Leica, who had led OpenAI's super alignment team, the team specifically tasked with long-term AI safety research, resigned from OpenAI publicly with criticism of how safety work has been prioritized there. He went to Anthropic. John Schulman, one of OpenAI's co-founders and the person most credited with developing the RLHF training method that powered ChatGPT, also left for Anthropic. These weren't random hires. These were people who had built the thing everyone else was building on. The fact that they chose Anthropic said about what they believed Anthropic represented. It also echoed something. The original founding of Anthropic had been a group of people leaving one lab because they believed safety wasn't being taken seriously enough. Now, 3 years later, a new wave of people were making the same calculation. Same concern, same destination. Not everything has been smooth, though. In early 2026, when the US Department of Defense demanded that Anthropic remove contractual restrictions preventing Claude from being used for domestic surveillance and autonomous weapons, Anthropic refused. The DoD designated them a supply chain risk and tried to cut them off from government contracts. Anthropic held the line. Whether that was principle or strategy or both, only they know. But it was a notable test of whether the mission language actually meant something when it cost something. So, who are Anthropic? They're a group of researchers who left the most successful AI labs in history because they believed it was headed in the wrong direction, who built a company on the thesis that safety and capability don't have to be opposites, who trained their first model in secret and sat on it for months rather than release something they weren't confident in, and who are now, by almost any measure, one of the 2 or 3 most important AI companies on Earth. The original bet that you could build AI responsibly, that you could prioritize safety without falling behind commercially, has not been disproven. Not yet. Whether it can hold as the money gets larger and the stakes get higher is a question they're living inside right now. That's Anthropic.